ModPo has come to Seattle, and we're at the Modern Language Association conference, and it just was the perfect time to meet up with Chee Dimock. He's a marvelous person, professor of English and American literature at Yale University, and Chee and I are about to talk about a poem by Nanao Sakaki. And it's not really a Seattle-ish relevant poem, other than we got a chance to meet with Chee here. But Nanao is friends with the Beats, and so Northern California and the Pacific Northwest and its relationship to Japan is a topic. So I'm really looking forward to that conversation with Chee Dimock. Well, we're here in Seattle, Washington, and none of the three of us is normally in Seattle, but we happen to be here at the Modern Language Association conference, and it's a very Seattle scene out there. There's wisps of fog and barges and birds. Anyway, but more importantly, we have Davie Knittle here.
Heyo.
And Chee Dimock. Hi, Chee.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us. Now, Chee and I decided to talk about a poet that we don't know a ton about, but are very excited about. And this is the collected poems of Nanao Sakaki, and it's called How to Live on the Planet Earth, which is also a name of one of the poems. And we're going to talk about one poem that you can find in this book, although you can see I've marked them here, and I might read one or two of the short poems.
There's one about the salmon that I really...
Oh, maybe we can find that and read it.
Big key salmon.
But this one is called Small People, and I'll read it, and then we'll just talk about it for a while. Small People. It begins with an epigraph. It seems that it's an epigraph. It's not embedded visually the way an epigraph. So maybe it's an epigraph, maybe it's the first lines of the poem, but it's quote, and it begins with, and then there's a second one. So, Small People. Inch by inch, little snail, creep up and up Mount Fuji. Issa, 19th century haiku poet. And another quote. A Navajo woman identifies 801 specimens of desert insects. An American scientist recorded, 1948. 3 million abandoned children in big Brazilian cities. 3 million soldiers in Red China. A Pennsylvanian sea lily fossil, 300 million years old from the Santa Fe Basin, now paperweight on my desk. I want to be a lightning bug for the coming 300 million light years dark age. Wow. Where do we want to start? Let's start with the title. Chee, Small People, what occurs to you when you hear that phrase?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's really, Nanao Sakaki really operates on the micro scale, right? So suddenly we see how interesting the insect world is. And I mean, it's really an interesting way in which the Japanese culture really intersects with indigenous culture in the Americas. And I think that, a lot of the indigenous art actually from various tribes would feature spiders and caterpillars and so I was really struck by the fact that he quoted this, which is not otherwise a very notable quote, right? That this Navajo woman identifies 801 specimens of desert insects, and how unique that number is when all the other numbers are rounded up, right? 3 million, 300 million. This is the only one that is specific. Yeah. So I think that's just something that made me really wonder.
Thank you. Davy, how do we deal with the shifting scale here? So Chee appropriately says we get the title and then we get the micro level, but then we get these very big numbers.
We do get these very big numbers, and we get an impulse to negotiate time and distance as both features of human experience and as features of power. And what I mean by that is that we get the age of the Pennsylvanian sea lily fossil, 300 million years old. We get the distance of 300 million light years, which feels both like a unit of time, but is in fact a unit of distance.
Yes.
But then we also get a sense of, and those are like ways of orienting ourselves in a relationship to space-time, of like the present being kind of impossible to fathom. But something that's important to me about this second quotation is that it is attributed to an American scientist. So we don't know what that power relationship is between who's doing the work of identifying the specimens of desert insects.
It's almost as if the Navajo woman is doing research for this American scientist.
Or that that person's research is being popularized or framed by
or
someone.
appropriated. Yeah.
Totally, being framed as an American
Or
scientist.
it might be, in effect, kind of semi-sacred testimony that the woman is saying this is the case about the number of desert insects, and that the scientist is reproducing a testimony of some kind.
And so it's raising questions about who gets to be American and who gets to be a scientist. And so I understand a negotiation of space-time here to be both about, like, what does it mean to be a human and locate myself in, like, this ecological context, but also in systems of power.
Yeah.
So, Chee, I'm going to try again at small people, and I'm going to offer.
Yeah.
No, well, I think we did really well with it, but it makes me think of several things, and let's accumulate between the three of us what it might mean. One is the size of people. Another is people are small in the large scale of things. I think I'll stop there. Any others?
Yeah, well, I mean, just thinking, even though obviously I don't think he was thinking about Emily Dickinson, but Dickinson has a poem called Minor Nation Celebrate something, right? Do you remember this? Yeah. So, I mean, small people in minor nation really is a really interesting, I mean, it's kind of like a minor chord or something, you know. It's just the kind of off key that nonetheless is so integral and crucial to the world.
Yeah. So, wow! You said Dickinson, so I'm thinking Dickinsonian, and I've read this book, and I think of Sakaki as not a very Dickinsonian poet, but is interested in here in the haiku and in that radical condensation that you get in Dickinson, and obviously one doesn't need Dickinson to bring the Japanese tradition to English, if you're the Nanao Sakaki.
Right. Yeah.
So what do we make of the haiku that begins this in relation to the title? Inch by inch, little snail, creep up and up. What's the gist, Davy, of this haiku poet? What is the wisdom that's being imparted?
I mean,
it's kind of obvious.
The wisdom that's being imparted is a kind of progressive working at something, is small movement accumulating, which is a really different kind of. It's a smallness of empirical scale rather than a smallness of scale as a resource or tool of power.
Right. So in an Aesopian way, it's the little one wins in the end.
Right.
Slow.
So the slow one too. I'm
wins the
definitely
race.
voting for the slow one. Slowness doesn't mean that you would lose out in the end. In fact, it's the slow and vulnerable and puny. Really,
Right. Right.
Those people actually survive for. Well, I mean, since I'm only 5 foot, so
There's
I'm
another
definitely
sense of small
rooting
people,
for,
right?
Yeah, small people, short people. I mean, small people. We're supposed to live longer or something. Yeah.
I mean,
sorry.
pardon the phrase. Closer to the ground.
Yeah.
Right. More like the lightning bug in the scale of 300 million years.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a little funny to say, but Mount Fuji. Mount Fuji. It's not just inch by inch, little snail. You'll creep up any mountain and you'll scale a mountain. It's Mount Fuji, which is a very sacred space.
Yeah.
So we're talking about a rising toward a kind of spirituality.
Yeah, but also the haiku form is a kind of a form for the poetic form itself.
Right.
Is a miniature form.
Yeah.
I mean, so I think that Isa also. I mean, Robert has also translated the Isa too. Also, I mean, I don't think that. I mean, a number of American poets, I think, have used the haiku form.
Can we take a pause? And I've only read the Gary Snyder preface to this book. We don't know a lot about Nanao, but So Nanao is originally from Japan, spent many
Right,
years in Japan. I believe was a soldier, Air Force person
Yes.
on the Japanese side.
Yeah,
right?
he was watching. I read something about him watching actually those atomic bombs on their way
Right.
to Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Nagasaki
Yeah, I
and
wonder
Hiroshima are both
yeah.
in the poems, referred to in
Yeah.
the poems. Then has spent a lot of time in the U.S.
Right.
and befriended the Beats roughly.
The piece, exactly.
Right, Ginsberg in particular.
The pictures in that book,
Yes.
there's Gary Snyder
And Allen Ginsberg.
and Ginsberg, exactly.
Yeah. So, do we want to situate him? You're starting to read him. How do you situate?
Well, I mean, I think that Gary Snyder is also very interested in small people, right? He has Barry Feast has a poem about a lizard. At the end of the poem, I think I'm not 100% sure then if my memory is right.
Yeah.
But I think that pretty much at the end of the poem, humans are gone from the planet, and there's a lizard around, and thinking
Here it's
it's
a
a
lightning
good
bug.
thing. Yeah. So, I think there's the same impulse. I can really see why Gary
Yeah.
Snyder would take it upon himself to make this a name, in American poetry as well.
Let me read a poem called Wind Speaks, which fits what we've been talking
Yeah.
about. Wind speaks. When in doubt, tell the truth, Mark Twain. When in pain, listen to wind. These black oaks, as Paul Cézanne draws, stand slanting in morning wind. It's the day of Hiroshima, August 6th. I hear my Neanderthal man's bone rattling with wind. So, he's really interested in origins, human origins, right? But here you have Twain, Cézanne, Hiroshima, and Neanderthal. Davy, do something with that. I'm so sorry. You're hearing a poem and you haven't read it.
Well, something else about Sakaki that I wonder about how it factors into this is, I believe it was the case that he had a practice of environmental justice work, of especially coral reef facing work in Japan, in Okinawa. And I wonder about small people also thinking about the smallness of the human condition, of thinking about, Chee, exactly as you were saying, thinking about both individual small humans, children literally in the poem, among others, but also of thinking about the erasure of the human species as maybe something that is beneficial enough to non-human life to be justifiable, to think sort of carefully and generously about human life at what cost.
Yeah, and I think that, to go along with that, I think that there's also a sense that, we could be beneficial to non-human life. There's a sense in which the non-human is already encoded in us, right? Because the thing about the atomic bombs is that all of a sudden human beings become non-human. We suddenly become matter, and the smallness of humans really becomes vivid when you have the magnitude of those explosions, right? I think that if anything can show us that we really, really are so tiny, so trivial, so insignificant, really, in the cosmos. Those atomic explosions will do it. That we are just physical matter, right? In terms of those bombs, we are not human beings. And I think that actually the last stanza of this particular poem, the 300 million light years dark age, that is the dark age that is being launched by weapons of mass destruction, but launched by the U.S. And yeah.
It's very clever. It's almost beatnik clever, the end. And punny funny, the idea that I want to be a lightning bug. So bug is small, lightning is big, brightness is the antidote to dark.
Right.
I want to be a lightning bug for 300 million years of darkness.
Right.
So that's a little like the little snail climbing Mount Fuji.
Yeah. But
We got a big job ahead of us if you're the lightning bug, you know.
also-
Right, but it's bleak too because 300 million years of darkness, that's a very long
It's a
time
very
of
long time.
darkness.
It's more than 3 million abandoned
Yeah.
children and more than 3 million soldiers.
Yeah.
It's 300 million years of
Right.
darkness.
You know, it's also thinking of the dark ages and how, you know, there's a chance that actually all of us would go back to being Neanderthals in the sense that suddenly human civilization will be destroyed
Yeah.
and that will become primitive or less than primitive even, you know, less than human
Yeah,
in a second.
right.
Yeah.
And just I want to turn to you, Davey, in a second, but literary historically, you know, we think about Nanao having his own, I want to say, survival experience as a Japanese person coming to the U.S. and fitting into the late 50s, 60s, 70s, and early 80s movement of Gary Snyder movement of let's go hiking in the Cascades, let's get our feet muddy, let's do all that stuff, and create contact with the earth, connect to thinking about early humans in relationship with ecological movements. It's a very important poetic kind of sub-movement. It's not a movement, it's not part of the beat legacy that is lasting in contemporary poetry. It's, you know, for the groovy people who are thinking about how the beats inform contemporary poetry, that Snyder line sort of dies out. So it's really great that you have us for this session reading this man's
Yeah,
poem.
and also this is his picture, the back, when he was reading during an Earth Day in Tokyo. So it's funny that genealogy is being kept alive in Japan in many ways. I mean, you know, for reasons having to do with the atomic bombs
With the atomic
as
bomb.
well, that the Japan is not allowed to militarize. It's very committed to peace and ensuring the peaceful survival of humans in a way that I don't think that Americans, you know, have that kind of consciousness. Yeah.
David, you were going to say something a few minutes ago.
Just in thinking about, and this maybe brings some of these threads together, of the light year as certainly having time in it, but a light year being a distance. So thinking about like how, like if a light year is 5.88 trillion miles and you have 300 million of them, how far would the light of a single lightning bug travel? What would it mean to provide light that isn't like actually generative of light, that is like at such a far distance to facilitate that disappearance and that smallness, thinking about what a human is or what humans are to a distance of 5.88 trillion miles times 300 million is an inconceivable one, is like functionally the scale of a lightning bug, and to think about that disappearance, but also like lightning, exactly why Chee, as you're saying, is like a lightning bug flashes on and off. It's a sudden movement in which everything changes, in which like the entire condition of being is lit up or is dark.
Right.
And that feels useful too.
That's a great point.
It's fragile light because it's twinkling, blinking, but it is the light in the star that we use to measure our own creation, our own existence. Right? So this lightning bug is essentially a star that's twinkling out there. And I don't know, I'm overreading probably the haiku wittiness of the last part, because lightning bug and light years are pretty dark, but they're only light because of the twinkling. There's a poem called Twinkling that he writes, very short, I'll read it. Stars twinkling, breeze twinkling, Christmas tree twinkling, leaves twinkling, frost twinkling, earthworms twinkling, Mary twinkling, I assume that's the Christian Mary, Peter twinkling, Nanao twinkling, 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 twinkles. There's the twinkle little star that you get at the end. He's really pretty insistent that he's the one who's going to be twinkling
but along
in the
with
end.
all the other ones. I mean, it's the same thing in the Bicky Salmon about, you know, Gary, Bicky Salmon, Nanao, Bicky Salmon, all swimming. So, I mean, he really
Gary
likes,
Snyder.
He loves all this, thinking of all this, listing all the people that he would like to, whose company he'd like to be in, but at the same time affirming. I mean, it is a kind of affirmation. I mean, even the fact that there's so many of these people twinkling, that in itself says something about the human species, right? That we're
Right.
not all that bad if they're all those people.
That's
I mean,
right.
yeah, I mean, we the things are not going to be great, but at the same
Right.
time, they're
So
all these
that's
great
what I meant
specimens.
about
Yeah.
a kind of weird little comedy at the
Yeah,
end.
yeah.
You know, he's almost winking, twinkling. He's saying, "I'm Nanao's here.
Yeah.
I'm out there.
Right.
I know."
I mean, it's very. It sounds like Whitman, right? You know, it's I'm the grass under your feet. You know. It's,
Yes, when it's all said and
Right.
done, look for me
Yeah.
out in the sky.
Oh,
I'll be the
right.
little twinkling. Okay, Chee and Davy, we haven't talked about those abandoned children
Yeah.
in Brazilian cities,
Yeah.
big Brazilian cities. What does that do for you, Davy? I mean, why is that in the middle of this poem? And then we'll get to Red China.
Right, China. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's directly in dialogue with the second of those two epigraphs. If they're epigraphs, a Navajo woman identifies 801 specimens of desert insects, an American scientist recorded, of thinking about smallness as both a condition of human life, but also as an enforced condition of thinking about what are the scales on which people are forced into conditions of smallness, in which in what are the ways in which smallness is both like a kind of like human humility, a way of identifying, Chee, as you were saying, the non-human within us, and in what way is smallness a way of forcing an experience of stratification or disenfranchisement? How are these things happening at the same time? That this is both like about like what is the inherent condition of the human, and in what way is humanness dictated by its management or force or destructive power, and how do you hold those things at the same time?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because in fact, you know, the 300 million light years dark age, I mean, that actually is human cause. I think that there's a strong implication here that we are responsible for the dark age that we brought upon ourselves. And so, I mean, which actually is a perfect example of the Anthropocene, right? You know, that we are so tiny, but we nonetheless have unleashed this incredible power that will show just how small we are, but at the same time, we are the cause of it. And it's just that the tension, you know, unfortunate dialectic
Yeah.
between smallness and largeness that is once again
So
suggested.
scale counts.
Yeah.
You know, this poem is a way of saying something that's fairly obvious. Scale counts. Scale matters. You know, astonishing that a snail can get up the mountain. Astonishing that there are 801 insects, different insects, and that there are humans who've counted them and know and respect them,
Right.
and so forth.
And also,
But
as a woman, you know, I think there's Navajo woman, you know, that there's so few women scientists, and it just happens that this indigenous woman is.
and this presumably
yeah.
male scientist gets to
Yeah,
record
right,
her.
yeah.
But then, so 801 of those, and you're supposed to get to that point in the poem and think, wow, a snail can climb the mountain. Wow, there are 801. Wow, you know, how multiplicitous is the world, is existence, is nature. And then compare 801 to 3 million.
Yeah.
So while there are 801 insects, there are 3 million human people, beings, little people,
Yeah.
small
It-
people. Aren't they the small people,
They are the small
children?
people, you know, children. And, you know, I don't really know where he got that number from.
Doesn't
right?
seem possible,
yeah,
does it?
Yeah, it just seemed, but it's very odd that he's so specific that it's in big Brazilian cities. So there's a context that I think would be very hard for us to reconstruct. I mean, I think that, abandoned.
That's, and what about Red China? So we
Yeah.
went back and forth by email,
Right,
Chee,
yeah.
thinking, Red China. It's really not a contemporaneous phrase at the
Right.
time he's writing
Yeah,
this
although
in
Trump might.
July 1980.
Yeah,
Trump might bring us all
Might
the way
bring
back
us
to
back
the
to
Dark
that,
Age.
yeah,
Yes, right.
yeah.
But Red China is not a phrase you would use in 1980, except for the fact that we elected in November of 1980 a president who did talk about Red China still. A little outdated,
Yeah.
Reagan, a little outmoded from the 50s. But what does Red China mean?
Well, I mean, that phrase was the first thing that jumped out at me when I read the poem. It's so odd, it's so jarring.
Yes.
And so, you know, the only way I can wrap my head around it is to think that it's really in quotation marks, that it's a quotation that is used advisedly.
Right.
But on the other hand, you know, it's just, I mean, in China in some ways, and we're seeing it now, you know, I mean, the human rights record in China are just really abysmal, you know. So it's for some, I mean, in a weird way, Red China is in a highly qualified way. It's not a. It actually makes sense to think about China as a pretty terrifying place to be, and I think that, you know, the protests in Hong Kong recently certainly would suggest that for lots of people, you know, who are to some extent under the jurisdiction of China, that it is actually a pretty scary place to be. And so even though, you know, obviously Red China wouldn't be the way to think about it, there's a kind of a there's something about that's really troubling about China that is troubling to the rest of the world, that the rest of the world have to do something about, in the sense that we've just seen so much of it in terms of the way that the idea of the human is being challenged or qualified in such frightening ways.
I think the reason why, one of the reasons you picked this poem is because the political significance of the poem is not obvious at first. And that Red China is the closest he comes to that reference. So think about scale, since the poem's about scale. So Russia, Soviet Union, had a scale of geography, you know, from Europe to the Pacific.
Right.
But we never thought of it as a scale in millions because it's barely populated, and the center of power was always in one Europe. It was essentially a European power, right? China has always been, because of the sheer scale of population, the fact that there could be 3 million soldiers, while a number of abandoned children in Brazilian cities might be exaggerated, probably not the number of soldiers.
Right.
So if you're thinking about the scariness of scale in this poem, Red China, that phrase, conjures up the notion that people can be treated by the state as if they were insects. There are that many people in an army. Think about meeting an army of 3 million.
You know, because the Uyghurs, right now, I mean, the million figure actually is the appropriate scale on which to think about the fate of significant populations in China. So, you know, that's not even a stretch of the imagination.
Right.
It's a very
we
realistic
think about
scale.
Number of hundreds of people who are threatened or interned or whatever as a major political crisis. 1 million Uyghurs, right, on the far western edge of the country. That's not a big number, but it's in the scale of China, but that's
it's not
inconceivable number of people.
Yeah.
Do you think, either of you, that Nanao is thinking about that sort of diminution of the individual human? Yes, you do.
I absolutely do. I think he's thinking about scale as both a useful set of tools for thinking about what the human condition is to and within the non-human world, but also thinking about scale as a set of manipulatable strategies, of thinking about scale as an instrument of power rather than as a measurement that happens outside of structures of power. And I think that's why we get the juxtaposition of thinking about lives, children's lives, soldiers' lives, sacrificed for systems of power, alongside getting information about how old a sea lily fossil is that's on his desk, that some of that information feels like it's empirical or scientific information about the Earth. And a lot of that information is about how systems of power work, which makes scale not just the magic of the poem, but the mechanisms of scale become visible within the work of the poem, which I think is what it's exciting that the poem is doing, is explaining how scale gets manipulated as well as how it can be useful.
Yeah, because I think that there's something about the brute manpower of China, right? So 300 million soldiers. But if there's another kind of power that is actually at play in the description of this, I mean, how odd it is that Pennsylvania sea lily fossil would be found in the Santa Fe Basin and would just be a paperweight, on on his desk. I mean, there's a certain degree of power too that you can just make that fossil. That 300 million year fossil just be a paperweight. There's a kind of drastic reduction in scale that speaks to the power of the person who has the power to induce that kind of reduction.
And just think about the word Pennsylvanian in the context of 300 million years.
Yeah.
What? It's meaningless. Red China is meaningless too in the context of 300 million years. These state definitions are silly in that kind of context. So this actually leads me to a final question, and then we'll go around for final thoughts on this poem. So a lot of Nanao Sakaki's poems are what we'd call metapoetic. There's a reference to the poet writing the poem.
Yeah.
And he's very clever about that. This is one where that happens, but it's a little submerged.
Right.
Which one of you is going to point out the reference to the poet writing the poem? This is like a little quiz question. I'm sorry I phrased it that way. It was just mentioned recently in this conversation.
I want to be a lightning bolt now.
Well, I mean, that I, but it's preceded by...
Get returned to the writing desk.
He's got a writing desk.
That's right.
One gets the sense that this poem is written by someone who on his desk has this, either is imagining it or has a little... The poem is being written by a my. It's the first time we get to a first person, and then it turns to that great last stanza, which begins with an I.
Yeah.
So who is this writer?
Yeah, he has a paperweight on his desk. That is interesting. What kind of a poet is this, right? Actually, I don't have a paperweight on my desk.
Well, you should.
I should?
Send you a fossil.
Okay.
No, but the
Actually,
idea
I do have
that...
a fossil. I mean, it's not a paperweight, but I do have a lump of fossil in,
You should put it
in
on
my
your writing
possession.
desk.
Yes.
But somehow, Davy, help me. Somehow, this writer is trying to figure out. All right, am I in Santa Fe or Pennsylvania, or do I know? Do I know Mount Fuji? Where am I? What am I writing for? What is my topic? What is my scale? What is a poet supposed to be writing about in the context of the entire ecosystem of the universe?
What is taxonomy, and who gets to decide it? That there's clearly like a taxonomic anxiety about a Navajo woman is identifying 801 specimens of desert insects, and we don't know if that taxonomy persists within the recording of the American scientist. We don't know if the American scientist recording and the Navajo woman's recording, if we're reading those as two different people, are separate. But then we get the taxonomy of who's deciding what is a Pennsylvanian sea lily fossil. Is the poet, is the speaker doing that identifying?
Yes.
Is the speaker at once questioning who gets to taxonomize and trying to taxonomize at the same time?
Yes.
Yeah, but also taking advantage of that too, right? Because I think that there's certainly a degree of pride in there. We can say many other things, but there's definitely is a degree of pride that this particular 300 million year fossil is on his desk.
And that pride leads to the hubris of being a first person speaker in a universe this big and where we are this small, but to say, I want to be a nothing, nobody, inch by inch, climbing Mount Fuji. Gary Snyder in his preface says something like, Nanao, he, especially in his heyday, he would just show up, with his satchel, and he'd stay a week or two and then move on. There's something inch by inch about the way in which Nanao Sakaki has lived his poet's life in the United States.
Right, he has definitely crossed the American continent, but on foot. I mean, just like that snail.
I think so.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that there really is a sense that, I think that what you said earlier about the space and time kind of dynamic is really interesting. If you think in terms of long durations, actually, then even large spaces become thinkable. Right,
In small poems, all the poems are so small.
Yeah, I think that's really a self-affirmation, a tremendous self-affirmation, that all is not lost.
Right.
That there is,
Right, almost Whitmanian, as you said earlier.
Yeah.
Well, let's get some final thoughts. We could talk more about this, but we've got to wrap up. So, who's got a final thought? Davy, what's your final thought? Something you haven't said yet that you wanted to.
Something that I haven't said yet is to think about. We've been thinking about there being a lot of darkness and thinking about systems of power in this poem, there's also something kind of like joyful and lovely about the lightning bug. And this is something that I really feel in this poem is a difficulty of trying to reconcile with the delight at the fossil, the joy of thinking about like I could be a lightning bug, I could appear and disappear, and to have that appearance and disappearance at once be like, here are the ingredients of the Anthropocene, here are the ingredients of the end of the human condition, which is occurring with lots of damage and destruction to both human and non-human lives, but here's also the appearance and disappearance of a lightning bug, and these things are like structurally horrible and like very tiny and lovely at the same time, and trying to think about disappearance as not itself coded in any particular way, but like having that multiplicity within it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, you know, because I think that most of us, I mean, all of us will become fossils, right? You know, I mean, we become
If we're lucky.
Yeah, we're lucky. But if we're lucky, we become fossil, then we become. I mean, being paperweight isn't such a horrible, right? It's not such a horrible fate. I mean, I can definitely take that. You know, it's
Yeah,
okay
I mean,
with me.
in a way, it turns out to be inspiration for somebody who's going to survive us all by being a lightning bug.
Actually, I think it's kind of nice. I mean, you know, he said he wants to be a lightning bug. I want to be a paperweight.
Oh,
in
that's
300
great.
million years from now.
You outdid him.
Yeah.
Did you have another final thought?
You know, I think that I mean, it's just thinking of American literature, you know, what it means actually to have him as part of American literature, because he definitely needs to be read in the company of Snyder, but not reducible to those either. So it's really a great, you know, I think that he represents a way really to remap American literature.
Yeah, that's a really great, for someone who is, if you don't mind saying, an eminent critic and literary historian of American literature. That's such an important thing to say. My final thought is really about two poems, which I'll read to you.
Yeah.
And so one poem is called "Who Needs Allen Ginsberg in Today's Japan?"
Yeah.
Okay, now you might understand this poem as to be a whole bunch of answers. You can see the poem is just this one big vertical list. So it might be, here are some things that need Allen Ginsberg. It might also be something else.
Yeah.
Air, water, soil. Who needs Allen Ginsberg? Soil, coral reefs. Talk about fragile. Oak virgin forests. Ezo grizzlies. River otters. Iramote wildcats. Anus, Okinawans. Korean Japanese. Happy middle class. Unhappy millionaires, gays, lesbians, this is written in 1988, gays, lesbians, beggars, criminals, hobos, organic farmers, fishermen, no nukes, free schools, children, housewives, musicians, artists, poets, leaves of grass, roots. That's who needs Allen Ginsberg.
Right, yeah.
I love that affirmation of Ginsberg.
Yeah, that our neediness is, in some sense, a testimony to the importance of poetry and the
Right.
Yeah,
No, exactly.
yeah.
Okay, we'll leave this topic with gratitude to both of you with this final, you know, I wander around and show up at Gary Snyder's house once in a while kind of poem. And this is a poem that I want to read to my students who are anxious about things sometimes. Go with Muddy Feet, it's called. When you hear dirty story, wash your ears. When you see ugly stuff, wash your eyes. When you get bad thoughts, wash your mind. And keep your feet muddy. And as you pointed out, his feet are kind of muddy.
Yeah.
Or sandy
right,
in that
or
picture.
sandy. Yeah. And then also the other picture too with his boots in the, I don't know if it's muddy, but it's in the grass. Yeah. It's
the one at the
the
end.
one at the end. Yeah.
Well,
not the thing. No, it's behind this.
Oh, yeah.
It's behind this dignified one. It's the one right after that.
There it is on the other side.
On the other side.
Oh, yes,
yeah,
you're
this
right.
Is the
There
one.
he
Yeah,
is.
this is the one.
Waving goodbye. In fact, it says bye-bye Nanao Sakaki.
And also the way in which he is aged is so interesting, right? I mean, he's
I love that. The book is, the collected poems are called How to Live on the Planet Earth. And Chee, thank you so much for coming around and hanging out with us.
It's been so
inspire lots of people,
really
I hope, to read this poet.
I hope so. I certainly hope that, you know, people would start reading him and talking about him.
I think so. This was fun, Davy. Thank you, as always.
Thanks, Al.
All right.